So my name is Christina Hannify, and I work in the School of Inclusive and Special Education in the IOE. And I'm going to share some of our work that's been ongoing for the last year with my colleague Anne-Marie Farrell, that has focused on our redesign of assessment to align our assessment with principles of authentic assessment with a large class of first year student teachers undertaking the BEd Bachelor of Education programme in the IOE. I was just thinking when I was sitting there, if we had lovely lecture theatres like this down in Drumcondra, it would make teaching in large classes a lot more comfortable. So I just to also mention that this work is part of a broader and ongoing research project that we're undertaking at the moment with some of our colleagues, Rob Lowney and Hadra Tabi as well. So I've got this structured around the what, so what, now what reflective model, and just to give you a kind of a preview, what is really around like what was our pedagogical dilemma, and that related to making assessment meaningful for our large class. So what relates to our response, how do we respond to our pedagogical dilemma, and that relates to our redesign of the assessment and how we went about doing that. And then finally, I'll talk a little bit about now what. That's really what we learned from this process, what were the limitations we identified towards, and I suppose what are our kind of implications moving forward. So in terms of our pedagogical dilemma, that relates to meaningful assessment at scale. And to give you a little bit of context, myself and Anne-Marie, we co-teach a module with first year student teachers, and the class has over 450 students in it. And our overarching goal is to support students in bridging theory with practice, and in particular helping our student teachers to develop inclusive pedagogical practice, because the module is around special and inclusive education. And I suppose our previous assessment format would have been examination based. And while there was some merits to that, we felt that it didn't really fully capture the complexity and the immediacy of inclusive pedagogy in real classrooms. So we wanted to do something to address that. So our core dilemma was really about how can we make assessment meaningful, how can we make it authentic, and how can we design it in such a way that it will engage all students. And the kind of core tension for us was that in order to do this, we knew that, in order to engage students in real world tasks, they would need structured scaffolding, they would need meaningful formative feedback, they'd need active learning opportunities. And I suppose, given the size of the class, and 450 students, first year students, there was, particular logistical constraints in terms of doing that. So what? Okay, our response last academic year was to redesign assessment. And as Anne-Marie always said to me, if this goes wrong, it goes wrong at scale. And so I suppose that's part of the reason we set out to do this as a collaborative team. So our response was to redesign the assessment, okay? And the assessment was centred on real world pedagogical dilemmas that were supplied by recently qualified teachers. So we engaged with schools, with teachers, and we recruited a cohort of recently qualified teachers, all of whom were in their first 3 years of teaching, and all of whom had come from our BEd programme in DCU. And we had a variety of teachers from mainstream class contexts and also teachers who were teaching special classes in special schools. And the role of our recently qualified teachers was to supply us with real pedagogical dilemmas that they were encountering in relation to inclusive pedagogy. So that formed the foundation of our assessment with our first year BEd students. And what was required then of the BEd students was to work collaboratively in groups to engage in a problem-solving process and to construct a solution-focused plan of action for our RQTs. So the authenticity went two ways in that the task itself was based on genuine dilemmas from real classrooms, and then also our student teachers were required to construct a response for a particular audience, that audience being the recently qualified teachers, not myself or not Anne-Marie, okay? So the authenticity was two ways, and also mirrored within that process was the collaborative problem solving that we were asking our first year students to engage in would mirror what's expected of teachers in schools based on policy documents and guidelines around special inclusive education. Just also to mention the assessment, we designed it to align with principles of universal design for learning, in that we incorporated provision of choice, in that students could choose who they wish to work with, and they could also choose the mode of presentation for their response. So it could be written, it could be oral, it could be a video screencast, and so on. So given the size of the class and given the complexity of the task, what I will say is we were surprised when we received all of the vignettes from the recently qualified teachers, because they were a lot harder than anything we would have constructed ourselves. They were a lot more complex, and certainly it took us a little bit of time to get our heads around the pedagogical dilemmas as well. And I suppose that was the benefits of engaging with the RQTs. We got really authentic challenges. Okay, but in order to support our first year student teachers who are at a very early stage, we knew we had to kind of put in place really structured scaffolding. So we did that in several ways. One of the things is that throughout the semester, across all of our lectures, we made really explicit links to theory and linking that to the particular dilemma. So for example, if we were talking about something like dilemma of difference, we might make reference to the fact, or to one of the vignettes that might be talking about putting in place supports for a child and the concerns of the teacher around not stigmatizing that child. So making those links to try and bridge theory and practice. We provided lots of additional resources for our student teachers, like practitioner resources on Loop that will be relevant in addressing the dilemmas. We have pointers for each vignette to guide their thinking. We had clear rubric, checklists, and finally we had an opportunity then for students later in the semester to upload to Loop a draft submission, okay, so that we could provide formative feedback. And I'll talk a little bit about how we manage that with that large group of students. 4 minutes, okay. So this was one of the key things for us and something we learned a lot from. Our student, in terms of giving formative feedback at scale, we dedicated one of our lectures with that large class to an assignment workshop. When the students sent us on their draft submissions, we looked across the draft submissions, we looked for patterns of error, patterns of strength, and then we used that particular assessment workshop to give feedback. What's important to say around that assessment workshop is that that was a large class, and we very deliberately structured how we laid out that large class. So students worked or sat in that large class with the students other students they were working with on the task, and the class was organised, or the lecture theatre was organised according to the vignette students were working on. So you'll see there on the top image there how we would have had all the students for vignette number 1 in one section of the theatre, all the vignettes for all the students for vignette 2 in a particular part of the theatre, and so on. And that was very deliberate, because within that assessment workshop, we did give formative feedback that was generic, that was relevant for all students, but we also took the opportunity then to get students working with their peers in self-assessing their own work and their own drafts, and we then circulated around that lecture theatre to give targeted feedback according to each vignette. So feedback that was relevant to vignette 1, we were able to kind of talk to that particular cohort of students as a group, and then move on to vignette 2, and so on. And another element of that particular workshop was that we had noted in the draft submissions from students that most of the students didn't pay any attention to the grading criteria or the rubric. And so during that particular assignment workshop, myself and Anne-Marie, we modelled the task. And we came up with our own pedagogical dilemma related to teaching large classes, and we modelled the task, and we asked the students to take the grading rubric and assess myself and Anne-Marie and give us a grade. And some of them were very generous and some of them not so much. So that was really valuable, because it got the students actively engaged with the grading criteria, and it also it made our expectations really explicit. And I know we're coming to the end, so I'll just kind of finish up. This was the students' perspectives on it. So this is just some of the kind of perspectives we gathered from students. Students really valued the task. They valued that it was, real, genuine dilemmas from real classrooms. Some students talked about the transfer of skills they experience, or the skills that they develop, like being able to kind of independently research a problem or a challenge and knowing how to go about doing that. And also some students talked about how difficult and challenging the task was. Some students felt that at the beginning they didn't think they would be able to complete this task, but by engaging in that collaborative problem solving, they surprised themselves in what they could actually achieve. 1 minute, okay. I suppose I'll just kind of finish up kind of our lessons and limitations. The lessons we learned. Students, authentic dilemmas certainly supported engagement. It supported our teaching. It made our teaching more relevant. Okay, it helped us kind of see what's actually happening out in schools, and what are the challenges early career teachers are encountering, and bringing them back into our teaching and really honing in on that. It helped us sort of explore new ways of facilitation for workshops, and also in giving formative feedback at scale. So the idea of structuring the physical space of the lecture hall is something that we will take forward with us into this coming semester 2, and also with other large classes. And in terms of limitation, it took considerable time and coordination, many hours. It was complex, logistically very complex, probably something that's very challenging to do on your own. I suppose that was the power of like the two of us working together across the semester. And so I suppose I'll finish up there, and if anyone has any questions, they can ask.
Thanks, Christina.